Welcome to the Bitcoin not blockchain securing the technology of money presentation. This was prepared by the Set Life Network as a nonprofit dedicated to technology education, and I'm here to introduce you to Bitcoin, what it is, what it's used for, um, and we'll get right into it. So Bitcoin, to outline this presentation, we're going to kind of go into five little categories here that honestly, they're a little related, but they're pretty distinct. Security-focused software, scarce resource, an open source project, speculative meme, and a digital currency. Bitcoin is all these things. Depending on what kind of conversation you're having with somebody, you'll be talking about one of these things over the other. These are kind of like the highest level categories, the different contextual lenses that you can look at Bitcoin from. And so this presentation it'll assume as little as possible of what you've heard about Bitcoin. It is going to get a little bit into the basics, but I will also have some more, advanced details kind of interspersed throughout each slide. So hopefully it's a little bit for everybody and you can follow along. But before we get into the first category here, really kind of to highlight this last category is currency, we got to ask the question, what is money? Everybody, if you're in a well-developed country and it has an economy, you kind of just consider money part of your everyday life. You don't really ask too many questions about it, but when you really analyze it, from a conceptual perspective, something like you trying to define this thing, like you're gonna try to make a dictionary definition of the word money. You really start to think through about a lot of this stuff, and you basically boils down to three functions. Three functions of money. Good money should be very good at these things. And the first thing is a medium of exchange. So you get your money from someone else, who gets it from someone else, who gets it from someone else, and so you end up with this chain of money moving from one person to another. So it's a very social technology, if you were to call it technology. Money is used between two people. So you need more than one person for money to be valuable. And when you earn money, you're proving that you gave something in exchange, a good or a service, and you only need it to trade for some good or service in the future. So this is important. You're proving that you gave something, unless it's something like a gift, either way, that person still values you, you know? So whatever it is, when you value something, you're going to spend money on it, right? So the exchange that happens is money goes out one way, and then in return, the other way is something valuable, whether that's a good or a service. So you have this exchange system from one person to another that's trying to measure the value being transferred from one person to another. So that's kind of one property of money, and we'll dive a little deeper. But number two here is a store of value. You expect to be able to save whatever you don't need to spend, and when you do decide to spend your savings, you want it to be as valuable as it was before, if not even more valuable. So good money should be, valuable in the sense that it can hold its value over time. You can store that value, in whatever form it is. If it's gold, if it's a stock, if it's cash. Money can come in different forms, but we really want to judge it according to how well it can store value. The third thing that it does is it accounts units for us. So when it just kind of like, don't overthink this one, it's just like kind of simple mathematical terms. You want you want money to be countable easily, right? So you don't want like something that you can't count up linearly to serve as your money. And you expect to be able to buy $1,000 worth of food. You don't sort of count how many chickens you're going to eat in a year. It sort of simplifies the way that you account for valuable resources. So you can measure, you can multiply 1,000, you can divide. It's easy to work with from an accounting perspective. And so you don't want it to be volatile. And that kind of goes into the volatility, kind of plays into the store of value a little bit. But accounting wise, in order for you to have a good accounting system, you need to be able to divide whatever you're using your money into smaller units. And so it's these units that really important for that digital scarcity element. And so you expect your government in most cases to kind of control the inflation. So if you're talking about an accounting system, there's a total number of bitcoins, dollars, whatever it is, that exist in the system, and you're only ever working with a subset of those, like a definitive accounting transaction. So the thing that you want to prevent here is hyperinflation. So if something's worth $1,000, you know you can buy food $1,000. If 3 years later you can only buy dinner with that same $1,000, you got yourself some hyperinflation. This is not good for an economy. It's not good for society to be able to buy goods. So the supply and demand of money is driven by all these social dynamics, and we use tools and technology to exchange, store, and account for the value of every human being. Because again, it's kind of like an imaginary object. We're all agreeing to use whatever it is that's valuable to us as money. And so this is what we're talking about when we say money, and we'll go into a little bit about the history of money because that's very important to understand how it works today. Um, but yeah, we're highlighting here the value being exchanged between humans. And so if you think back when we used to barter for things, civilization, we've still always had resources, and we were still exchanging things between each other. And so in this example, we come into a few problems. So say I work hard to find and domesticate an ox, and that's my life. And when it can pull the heavy loads, it saves me time and energy. So this is useful for me. It's valuable. But I spend a lot of time domesticating this ox, and I don't have a lot of time to grow apple trees. So I do still kind of want apples. So they're delicious, and if you're considering a trade, from what I have that's valuable, that I've stored my value in over time, is this ox. And so I can't exactly cut that ox in half just for the bushel of apples, just because I want to eat some apples. Like it's a waste. And so you say, okay, well, just buy more apples with the ox. Well, then I have too many apples, and I'm still wasting away whatever I'm not eating. And it's okay, well, maybe you can sell one ox to two people and then get, not just apples, but silk or some shelter or whatever other food you need. And that might work, but then this just gets complicated because we're trying to figure out what the value is for everything and what a fair trade is. And, that takes time as well. So we have these three issues, and money helps us figure out how to do these transactions a little bit more easily. And so, if you look at the history where we start with bartering, livestock, all that, that's really what kind of started to represent value. Is in these olden times, these are commodities. These are the money backed by valuable limited goods, and this is what we mean by when something's priced. So, if there's a demand for something, it has a price, and that price is probably higher than you think it would be. But we started here. This was kind of what made sense because we were dealing with resources among people, and we realized we can make some systems where we can use precious metals to make our money have these properties that are useful when you're transacting between people. You want it to be portable, durable, scarce, and divisible. This is kind of what we were working with when we developed cowrie shells. We started to use metal tools. These things, they're still useful, but maybe you can have a whole bunch of tools, and it can act as something valuable that somebody can trade you for. But it still kind of holds inherent value because it's useful to you. But we did want some of these other properties. So with modern coinage, even though these coins aren't exactly used for anything other than just transacting, it gives us these properties that are favorable for having an economy that can transact. So leather pelts were also used. Paper is when we started to print our money on top of paper, and that sort of just acted as our accounting system, sort of like IOUs. And this came about because we started to use gold because of its scarcity. It's shiny. People that was kind of the what was used, what was understood among many people to be something that would be accepted. And so that's still a commodity money, I would say. And then when we started to develop this fiat money, the difference here is that it's actually backed by a central authority, a government, and their ability to enforce and regulate that money. So when we started printing money on paper, it was backed by gold because we actually have some resource that we value. But we started to build these systems of trust from a government, a bank, an institution, and they kind of just they run off of everybody democratically and willingly agreeing that the paper is valuable. because there's only so much you can do with paper, but it can have more value depending on who can enforce its ability to be used as money. So the key problem here with the fiat money that in the context of Bitcoin is really what's being solved here is that central authorities don't have to prove that they gave up anything other than the cost to print the bills and mint the coins. So the people who are deciding, literally creating the money, the paper that we're using every day, dollars, euros, whatever, they're not proving that they gave anything up, and that's kind of one of our fundamental. That's core to the functions, the medium exchange function. Otherwise, what is money, right? So that's an issue with fiat money, and a little bit of backstory here. Kubla Khan in the 13th century was, you know, uh, one of the people who we can trace the earliest forms of fiat money to. And actually, a good reference here is to go check out the National Geographic show, The Origins Journey of Humankind by Jason Silva. He has an episode on money. And I'll just kind of describe a scene that's very interesting, but definitely go ahead and check it out elsewhere. But what he has is he reenacts this situation where you have a trader from the 13th century in the Mongolian Empire. Kublai Khan's been taking things over, left and right. He's a conqueror of that era, right? So he's got an army. He's got a lot of power, military power, and so you have this trader come into his throne room, and he brings, I think it was like sapphires, and like he's expecting a trade, right? He wants to be able to provide for his family. He wants to be able to, he's been traveling for months to get these precious metals into the market for trade. And so instead of getting gold or silver, which is what he was expecting, Kubla Khan comes out with this stuff right here, just a bunch of notes, and he pulls one out, gives it to him, gives him a piece of paper, and says, "There you go, that's your payment. You can spend it in the market because everybody knows what will happen if they don't accept this in exchange for the actual goods that you brought me." So it was a very menacing sort of encounter in the scene. And the trader starts to complain, and then Kubla Khan's guards are like, "Whoa, you sure that's a good idea? Didn't you see that guy outside?" So yeah, it was really this threat of violence, honestly, that sort of jump started the evolution of fiat money. And so the way it kind of developed, obviously fast forwarding a bunch, but this is the current foundation of all of our global finance. It's a system called fractional reserve banking, and this enables like investment, like loans and things like that. And the way it starts, just to really go step by step here, fundamentals. We start by depositing. Someone's got some money, they deposit it into a bank. Bank reserves 10% of that, so they keep 1,000. Sorry, they keep 100 out of that 1,000, and they take the other 900 and they loan it out to somebody who's trying to start a business, or maybe they need some money to pay for medical bills, whatever it is. They make a loan because they know it's going to be paid back with interest, or rather, they don't know that, but that's how the system works. And what happens is that person, either they spend it, whatever happens to it, they spend it, on medical bills, and now the hospital have it. So that's going to end up in a bank account. That's the thing. It's just going to be deposited into another bank by another person, and the bank's going to reserve 10% of that. And then they're going to loan out the other 810. And so we have this cycle of loans and deposits and expenditures that lead us all the way to the end here, where a total of $4,095.10 came about from the original $1,000 deposit. And so you have to think, it's like, okay, well, there's $4,000 in the bank that just by changing hands, from an original 1,000, it seems like we have more than we should have. There's an argument there to be made on who decides this 10%. Like, is that enough? Shouldn't the bank kind of just hold on to the money for when that person comes back and gets it? Because in reality, if everybody tries to come get their money at the same time, there's not going to be enough. It's the same physical dollars that were just passed around a bunch of people. And now we have an accounting system that says we have more than 4 times the money than it seems like we should have. So this is how, you can read more about this. This is a very basic, simplified version of how the entire financial system, how it all works. There's different risk factors, and maybe it's not always 10%, and yeah, it's a whole rabbit hole to go down. So just touch upon it for now, so we get some context here. And so now that we know what money is, we're going to jump into Bitcoin as a software And it's really security focused because again, title of this presentation is securing the technology of money. So now that we've defined what money is to us, we want to develop a technology that makes it so that it's secure, so that it performs those three functions as well as possible. And so just some keywords to watch out here as we talk about this. It'll be a little technical, but I'm going to do my best to keep things simple. We have wallets. You think about your wallet, the wallet you carry around, making transactions. That's all familiar. Blocks, blocks of transactions. Specifically, we're going to get into what a blockchain is and how blocks are constructed and things like that. And the other sort of players here in this system that we're about to get into is nodes and miners play an important part of the system sort of operationally. So we're going to really analyze how Bitcoin actually functions in as simple terms as possible, but I'll be sure to follow along. And stop and go look something up if you think you need a bit more background on it. But when we think about software, Bitcoin as its software, one part of it, one important piece to it is a wallet software. So, to use Bitcoin, you need to download, sorry, to receive Bitcoin specifically, you don't want to download a wallet app. And this wallet app, it's going to generate a pair of keys, and keys look like this up here in the top right. They're like a random string of numbers. And there's a pair of them that you can create, one that's private and one that's public, and they're sort of linked together mathematically using one-way cryptographic hashing functions. So again, that's a very technical topic, but all you really need to know are that there's two components to it. One that in practice you keep private, and the other one that's public. And the public one acts as the address in some sense that somebody can use to send you money. And so what that person's going to do to actually send this to you is they're going to generate a transaction. That transaction needs to be signed to say that it's authorized by this person, the private key. And the signature is impossible to forge. That's a mathematical fact. I'll show you why in a second, but it's the one-way cryptographic hashing function that creates that impossibility. And I should put a little asterisk here because technically impossible means 0% chance. It just, in this context, we're talking about math and, we're not talking about infinite terms here. So it's actually very, 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 very hard. Impossible in the sense that it would take longer than the lifespan of the universe if you actually dedicated time to forge this private key. And that's enabled by math, amazing as it sounds. But the other things to look out for here is this transaction that's being generated. It's broadcast out to the internet, to all the nodes that create this network. So these nodes, they take a look at these transactions, they make sure that they're valid, and what they're going to do is, add it to the blockchain. And yeah, so basically, there's a validation process, which is why all this cryptography stuff's important, which is why you need to keep this private. And remember what we're talking about money here. So this is all in the efforts of building something that's secure to transact with. And so just to outline what a cryptographic hash function is, what we're looking at here is sort of like an input. These are some Spanish sentence, some Spanish words, and they go into this block, this yellow black box called a cryptographic hashing function. And out the other side comes a green box that basically is a completely different string of characters than the original blue input. So the thing that you want to look out for here is that all these are different. On the right-hand side, there's no resemblance between them. It's all seemingly random. And if you compare, look at this. These two sentences are identical except for one letter. So when you take that one letter out, it's not like your output changes by a little bit. It's a completely different string. So there's really just no way for you to know, just having this green box available to you, that the original message was anything like it is. So it's one way. You don't know if you cover up the left-hand side of this, there's absolutely no way you could know what the original input was. So that's what a one-way cryptographic hashing function is. We say hash, this is what we're talking about, is converting one thing to another in a way that's indistinguishable. And so this matters because when we talk about the blockchain, We're really just talking about a bunch of transactions that are put in order that define how money moves from one address to another, from one set of keys to another, right? And so with a large hard drive and an internet connection, you can run your own bank with a full node. And what you do is you download your own version of the ledger. Every transaction that's been created since 2009 gets downloaded to your computer, and they have a mathematical relationship between each transaction that makes it so that like you know what version you have. You can actually check that version with other people's versions to make sure that everybody is on the same exact page. No one's trying to spend coins they don't have. There's no funny business going on with fractional reserve banking or like who's controlling the money when it goes from one place to another. Um, Everybody just has everyone's like all the transactions that have happened, and you download all that just to know you get up to today's transactions, and you can be sure because your computer has run the validation that these are the valid transactions. And so an important other piece here is that once you send money on the Bitcoin network, once your transaction gets accepted and added to the ledger, people are going to be downloading that ledger for the rest of the time. So there's no changing that. There's no refunds. You're your own fraud protection. You need to be sure that you're sending your money to the right person. And so this is a feature that we might think that we want from today's modern banking is when when there's a fraudulent charge on your credit card, you can ask for you can get that reversed, or there's no idea, there's no concept of a refund. That person would just have to send the money back to you, right? So we simplify this idea of transactions going from one place to another, and then to go back, they've got to basically be made as another transaction in the ledger. There's no pulling money back out. If calling the fraud department, be like, hey, somebody took my card. So in practice, this seems like it could be something. It makes you really have to pay attention when you send money here. There's no willy-nilly kind of just you can just reverse this. There's an irreversibility to the system that we want. It's a desirable property because as a base layer of money, it has a lot of uses. But we'll get to that in a bit. And the question you might ask is that we have all these nodes all over the world. Remember, when you make a transaction, it gets sent out over the internet. So how do they? What's the next step here? How do the nodes decide which transactions to add to their ledger? And so they get organized in blocks, these transactions, and miners are actually another player here in the system, because it's not just nodes that are keeping track. So the nodes are keeping track of the transactions, like they're keeping the latest blockchain, the latest version of the blockchain up to date. But the miners are actually in charge of putting those transactions in order. And so what they do is they create a block, and then they submit this block to the nodes. And the nodes make sure that every transaction in the block has a valid signature. And miners will get paid if their block is accepted by the network and added to the chain. But there's ways to prevent them from cheating. And we'll get into this, but they have to compete in a sense, and they're solving a bit of a math puzzle. And whoever finds the solution first is rewarded with newly created Bitcoin. And every 10 minutes, a new block, about every 10 minutes is really, this varies, but on average, every 10 minutes, a new block is accepted with a fixed amount of newly created Bitcoin. We'll get to this asterisk in a second, but we're getting into how new money is created here, which is kind of exciting. As whenever you think of money in any sense, you always got it from somebody else. Where did it come from? Where's the originator? Who's printing it? We're talking about the central authorities, and this system it works a little differently. So it's not just a government that's deciding. What we do here is we build a system here that's going to create this digital scarcity aspect to our money. So the key things here are that the math problem is not easy to solve, that these miners are doing. And the more miners that there are competing for the reward, the more difficult the puzzle becomes to solve. And more difficult means more electricity expenditure, which on the next slide, there's some more details there. But this digital scarcity element in Bitcoin means that creating new Bitcoins is actually very hard. It's not just easy as printing money. It's difficult to create new Bitcoins because of this game theory, this puzzle, this effort that needs to be put in. And another rule here is that only 21 million Bitcoin will ever be created. And this software enforces that. And everybody agrees to run this software. And again, with these social constructs that we are talking about with money, there needs to be that agreement, that consensus between people that there's only ever going to be 21 million and that we're not going to change those rules because we like digital scarcity. We want that to be a property of our money. And so everyone agrees on that software, and that enforces the supply limit, and it preserves our digital scarcity. So all the Bitcoins that exist were created by mining. Remember those miners? They're competing here, and that's how new Bitcoins have gotten created since we started. And you can think of this game, this puzzle, as a digital lottery in a sense, where the tickets can only be purchased with the electricity needed to solve the math problem. Everyone rewarded with Bitcoin proves that something was given in exchange, a fundamental difference to fiat money creation. So what do we mean by that? This system we'll talk about a little bit more, but you have this little cartoon that with the government, when they want to print money, they're not proving that they gave something in exchange necessarily. Like the green ink is not the dollar, the amount of green ink that's needed to print $100 bill is negligible in comparison to the actual value that you can buy with that $100 bill. So it's a huge margin in a sense to create that dollar bill. It's basically zero. It's close enough to zero that in comparison to the way that new money is created in Bitcoin, it's actually expensive. It's very hard to make new units. And you might, start thinking about, okay, well, can we divide the number of Bitcoins? Because we don't want to run out, right? So in that sense, you just want to be able to divide them into small enough units, which you can do. 100 million Satoshis compose one Bitcoin. Yeah, that's a minor detail here, but we're still talking high level here. We want to prove that something was given in exchange. That is an important element of our money. And so why can't you cheat? Why can't you break this 21 million limit? Like, what is this rule that's being enforced? Like, how secure is it really? And can transactions be reversed? So we keep assuming we keep assuming these things about the security of our system, but why is it that they can't actually cheat? So these miners, what's stopping them from just giving them a bunch of money? And the nodes, they have to validate this, but how does this all work? So if a miner is trying to reverse a transaction, I'll give you a good example. Let's say you buy a car and you receive Bitcoin for that car, and that other person who sent you the Bitcoin, you gave them the car, and then they figure out a way to reverse the transaction. And then they get their money back and the car. That's terrible. You don't want that at all. That would break. This would be useless. This form of money would be useless if that was possible. So how is it so difficult how is it that that's never happened? It turns out a miner would make more money earning rewards than trying to rewrite the blockchain. So that person, if they were trying to reverse the transaction so they can scam you out of a car, they would need to spend so much money, far more than the value of the car, in order to compete in this system that everybody else is competing with. They're working on block number 91, let's say, with transactions. You're this one miner, you bought the car, a few hours ago, and you're trying to alter this transaction. You'd have to redo all the computations between blocks 74 and 90, and you got to do block 91 that everybody's working on. Everyone's resources are going towards block 91 right now. So how are you going to catch up, really? You got to do it before everybody else, and then just the one block, and then you'd have to do it all over again since that one block went. So yeah, this makes Bitcoin very resistant to censoring transactions. This system kind of just works on its own of people being incentivized to just be mining and be validating blocks. Like that's all that, like there's no, bank that calls up and says, hey, I need you to reverse this transaction. That's not how the system works. You can't, the system doesn't stop. It runs 24/7. There's always people trying to get, these block rewards. These, it's you get a supply, you get a portion of the supply of new money. So, what does this look like over time? This reward schedule. So they're scheduled to decrease over time, and they reinforce the effect of digital scarcity. Because interestingly enough, every so often, every 4 years or so, the amount of new Bitcoins that gets created in each of these blocks gets cut in half. So we had 50 at one point, and then that got cut down to 25, down to 12.5. We've got one next year coming up, a halving, where it gets cut down to 6.25, and this will continue on every 4 years or so. And I remember what I said about 100 million satoshis being composing one whole Bitcoin. We can go. This dividing isn't a problem in the long term. Like we'll just divide down into those hundreds of millions of units. So there's room to go here. There's actually the last Bitcoin scheduled to be mined after the year 2100. So there's plenty of Bitcoins to be mined still. Just in the sense that over time there'll be a certain amount, and so what you have is this effect on the price. And so look at this graph here, $1, $10, $100. This is the price of Bitcoin over time. And it seems to be, again, we have a limited sample size here. It seems to be that it's trending upwards. And it's theorized that this is why this effect, this halving schedule, puts that upward pressure on the price. Because if you think about it, the miners who are trying to get all these new Bitcoins, there's a point in time where literally their income gets cut in half. And so you got to plan a mining operation, pretty well ahead of schedule in order to understand that, you got to plan for this electricity because you're always spending electricity. You're going to need to, maybe sell some of this Bitcoin to be able to pay for those costs. And so if the amount of Bitcoin is going down, and the price of each Bitcoin isn't going up, then you'd really go out of business pretty quick. And so this is an interesting effect that this Bitcoin being very much an experiment. We're seeing whether this upward pressure will continue into the future. And again, we'll get into the speculation side of things, but this fundamentally on the protocol level of the block rewards and the miners and the nodes and the software that runs creates this effect on the price and this digital scarcity. So moving on, rewards won't last forever, like we said, but so yeah, a man, woman, or group of people coded and released the first version of Bitcoin in 2009 under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. So like I said, Satoshis. These are named after him, her, or they. So this is an open source project. This came out anonymously. This piece of software, it worked to a certain degree, but it's been built on top of. So it's been 10 years. So hundreds of software developers, security engineers, cryptographers, and game theorists have since contributed to the changes that we should be making to this software. Every change is intensely scrutinized. People care about their stored value. Some people, they use Bitcoin as a store of value, and they don't want their money in the same way that these people would care whether their bank is controlling their money, whether they're keeping it safe. You care about your money. You want to keep it safe. You want it to be able to store its value. So people really care on any changes that might, break. If something goes wrong, I don't want to lose my money, right? So what's interesting is that all this has been developed in the open, like free, open source, and transparent. Like there's no company leading these people. There's no like CEO in charge of making the decisions, making the decisions on what changes should be made. There are groups of people who agree on changes, and they discuss and they evaluate, and they're very critical. They do this peer review process, and all these people have been contributing over the past decade, like hundreds, if not thousands at this point. People trying to figure out the effects of what a change would have on such a widespread distributed network where so many different parts of the system can behave differently. And so there's a lot that goes into this, and it's powered by just the community. And there's a lot more to it, but when we start to talk about other cryptocurrencies, as you may have heard of other types of coins competing with Bitcoin in some sense, and I just want to note here that competition doesn't benefit as much unless there's information asymmetry. So what do I mean by that is, if you think of a typical capitalist economy or free market type of thinking, you say, okay, well, competition is good because there's two companies that provide the same thing, and that'll increase the quality of what's being put out because there's this competition element. But that kind of doesn't apply so much here because everything's on the table. there's no secrets that a company can keep from another company. Like that's where you would gain a competitive edge is when you hide what you know. You keep secrets and you only tell a group of people so that we can all collaborate together and then gain an advantage in the market. And so yeah, this is just a claim on whether turning that on its head makes a difference here. Like Bitcoin doesn't work that way. There's no competing when, look, everything's out already. Like anybody can kind of freely compete. If you kind of jump in and say, no, we need this change, you need to convince everybody, and everybody needs to be on the same page. So this is the engine that's powering the development of Bitcoin, as an open source project. And the way that kind of plays out in terms of people, right? This is kind of like a very cultural thing. There's underlying philosophies that go into the changes, and that's rooted in our cultural values. So, in some sense, Bitcoin uses memetics to spread its ideas globally, and if they flow pretty freely. The idea that we need a global censorship-resistant, digitally scarce form of money actually is what makes it popular. Like, why would I even be talking about Bitcoin right now if I didn't think we needed this and I didn't think that other people needed to learn about it? Because money doesn't work unless you have this idea element inside of everybody's head that it's valuable, right? So even dollars and euros, that idea came from somewhere. You were just kind of born into it, but the idea that this paper has value, it's important that we consider that and kind of go through this mimetic process, this cultural sharing of what it means to participate and use Bitcoin. So I like this tweet. Bitcoin is just a massive conspiracy to teach you about economics, finance, politics, and computers. So it seems like a giant rabbit hole, and it is. And you end up just learning a bunch of stuff about how things work, the history of money. You question what role you have in this global system. And yeah, it's interesting to kind of share that with other people in the form of memes and ideas. Obviously, that gets into the speculation side, right? So people act when it comes to making money, people act a certain way, and they don't want to miss out. And we have these price movements where it's a bubble, it's a bubble, it's a bubble, it's always a bubble, but the bubble is getting bigger. You can't deny that. So yeah, there are um, very abrupt price drops here and price movements in the value of Bitcoin in dollars. And it could crash 87% in a small period of time, right? So these things happen, but they happen all the time, so it's like not new. It's sort of part of the system. And yeah, it's horrific Bitcoin crashes here. They'll continue to happen. Most likely, I think they'll happen to a lesser degree. But yeah, I mean, who really knows about predictions about the future? It's just, these are the memes. This is really here. This is whatever ideas this is communicating to you. That's the point. And so one thing that I really want to just point out here is what we had a couple of years ago is just a lot of mania. And the word blockchain just lost all of its meaning because it basically became the thing to say when you wanted to, let people know that they should give you their money because you're working on the next big thing, right? So Ethereum, you might have heard, that's where you could create your own coins and you could kind of do a bit of like a company stock type of thing where, if you're gonna create a new company, right? That serves something that provides value to people, whatever it is. There's nothing inherently wrong about that, but you basically had scammers saying they were building the next Bitcoin, and they were playing off of people's fear of missing out. They saw Bitcoin skyrocket in price, and it's like, hey, you saw Bitcoin go up. How about my coin? My coin's actually better than Bitcoin, and you should buy in because if not, you're not going to get rich like me. So you had these snake oil salesmen saying, "Oh, ICO blockchains, like this is what you need to make money in the future. Like, come on." So yeah, you just have to be very suspicious of everything and everyone. Um, Securities laws here. I just want to say, we had this system in the U.S. where, in traditional terms, completely outside of crypto coins or anything, if you want to start a company, it's not like you can just go and raise money and like sell stocks of your company. because you might be full of shit. They exist to prevent dishonest business. They want people to be able to invest safely, and so you basically have to register with a government agency and prove to some degree that like you are trying to let people know about the risks of investing in your company so that they don't, just give you money and then end up losing it because, you're not actually cut out for it. So that's where this stuff kind of started going. And yeah, a lot of people got scammed out of their money. It's very important that you don't trust and verify what it is people are claiming. So, yeah, like kind of like how you download all the transactions of the blockchain, you don't just trust that somebody has a good version of it. You do it, you verify it yourself. So, yeah, you just need to watch out for some of these blockchain projects. In more recent months, you've heard DeFi and decentralization, all that stuff. Just be careful because people are using these words to raise money when they may not even have something real, something really innovative backing it. And if you believe in that long-term value that somebody could create, that's completely beside the point. So yeah, just watch out for that. And so last few things here is what does it mean to become a digital currency? So like, does this mean that Bitcoin and all its software, is it going to be able to power economies? Is it going to be able to actually be this global currency? So obviously, if you think about it, I mean, I live in the U.S. Most people watching this, maybe they don't need Bitcoin yet, because if you live in a developed country that has money that you can trust, if you trust your bank and government, you don't need Bitcoin necessarily. And need is a very particular word because you never know when you need it necessarily. We've had financial crises that really take people by surprise, and there's some countries, Venezuela, Argentina, Zimbabwe. Basically, if you're economically oppressed in a sense, where your government can't figure out how to, run a currency that serves its people, you need better money. It's a little easier to beam Bitcoin through the internet than to send paper to this country that, might have economically oppressed people. So, there's an argument there that as a currency, it might serve people in places that don't already have good systems of money. So there's that element to it. And then, in some sense, Bitcoin is a hedge on global financial collapse, which is not something that anybody wants. It's kind of like the analogy I make that actually I got from Andreas Antonopoulos. Also has some great content about Bitcoin education, but it's kind of like a lifeboat. Bitcoin, when you actually use it, one thing is using it to transact, but use it as a store of value because your money, the money that your government uses, is not cutting it for you. You don't think that it's going to store its value over time. Your inflation's too high. Bitcoin is kind of your lifeboat because right now, all the currencies of the world depend on the US dollar. That's our global reserve currency today. And, you can see a domino effect happening if anything ever happens to the dollar or, the euro. These stronger currencies prop up all the other ones. And, you really got to hope that it's not all just going to fall down like a house of cards. And if that were to happen, Bitcoin's an insurance policy against that. It's a lifeboat that you don't want to have to use your lifeboat ever. You want the ship to just work, but you also don't want no lifeboat. You want to have it there in case you need to use it. So this brings us to our final slide. Again, I use this presentation, some live settings, so Q&A. Leave your questions in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. But to wrap up here, this is not a utopia. This is not the greatest thing ever yet, right? There are problems, there are vulnerabilities, things like forks, Bitcoin forks, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV. They compromise the digital scarcity aspect of this. So, that's why they're not really kind of considered part of the system. If you really, are in Bitcoin and you use it, you want digital scarcity. This is important. It's an important property for all the reasons that we discussed. So you don't want another 21 million of them of coins to be just printed out of thin air. It's kind of defeating part of the purpose. So the other thing here is that large nation states may have the resources to successfully execute a 51% attack, and that was what we were talking about with those miners cheating. double spending Bitcoins. You don't want, that's the whole point. We're trying to, prevent inflation. We want deflation for value storage. And we also remember the developers are human. The people who build onto the software and make it better and more secure, they're human. They make mistakes. So we got to watch out and make sure that we have a very intensive peer review process for this, so that nothing gets snuck in, nothing that we don't overlook anything. So yeah, and obviously scaling Bitcoin to reach billions of people, like that's something that's very much in the works right now. If billions of people to support billions of people transacting every single day. Um, there's some other systems that need to be built on top of Bitcoin for this to work out. So again, these are rabbit holes in and of themselves. But if you do put the world's money into perspective, it's still very, very early. This is a experimental technology. Um, you know, this is actually an old graphic. I think 41 billion would be closer to 200, 1 to 200, I believe. And so, yeah, you have it starting to get into the size of Apple, Amazon, but you can continue to see how much money exactly there is in the world. Stock markets, physical money, gold, all these stuff, the net worth of individuals. So, yeah, it kind of just helps put it into perspective here. I'm going to go ahead and end this. And if you're interested in what we do at SetLife, check out setlife.network. We really just try and focus on technology education. Bitcoin is just one of the things that we like to do work on. And yeah, go ahead and check out the website. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, subscribe. I'll be trying to put out some more content.